It's this potential for such a volatile and explosive ending that really sets Classic apart from the rest in the canon. Hey everyone, the Good Captain here. Welcome to another video in my In Defense of series. So this will be the last of this type of video for at least the foreseeable future, as I'll be transitioning to a 10-part strategy series on Axis and Allies Anniversary 1941 setup, and that will start release in late February or early March. So for this possibly final In Defensive, I'm going to argue In Defense of Axis and Allies Classic. This is what it's known as in the community. It's more specifically known as the Milton Bradley 2nd edition version, or, as we all know it, the one that started the Axis and Allies craze. First, I know you're probably thinking, why the hell does Classic need a defense? Everyone knows and respects this game already, so what's up? Well, I'm doing this because though there is a lot of nostalgic love for Classic, it doesn't get much actual play these days from the community at large, especially when compared to the other versions currently available. But this video should not and is not at all an argument that Classic is the best version or that even insists that you play it. The intent of my defense is to focus attention on 3 specific and quite subtle aspects of Classic that set it apart from really all of the follow-on versions in the canon. And it's these subtle differences that, in my opinion, make Classic worthy of consideration as a seriously competitive, seriously fun, and seriously replayable game, even in 2021. So, a few disclaimers here before I start. First, yes, my box has some water damage. We're going to have to get over that. This is my original game that I bought from Toys R Us in the mid-90s. I love it. Next, I have to address the elephant in the room. This version of Axis and Allies, if strictly played with the out-of-box rules, even if you're using any combination of the optional rules located in the back of the manual, is unfortunately a broken game. And if you want to know exactly why I believe that's true, check out my video linked in the description box below. But in quick summary, I'm saying it's broken as opposed to imbalanced because there is actually a winning script. In other words, if you and I played a vanilla version of the game out of box and you took the Axis, I could tell you exactly what I'm going to do as the Allies ahead of time, and there would be nothing you could do to prevent the outcome because I know the script. And I feel if you watch the video I've linked in the description box below, you'll know that script too. So for the rest of this video to make any sense, I will assume that players are correcting for this problem either by using my recommended rule edition of not allowing the invasion of neutrals, or by using a bid, which is usually between 6 and 18 IPCs, depending on what optional rules you're using from the back. Finally, my last disclaimer is that 2 of the 3 claims I'm going to make were arrived at by playing a lot of raw, out-of-box games, including roughly 75 to 100 games in my playgroup, 1 at a tournament, about 15 to 20 games online, namely through AAA. So I'm resumeing myself in this way only because Classic is sort of a sacred cow. There are a lot of veteran players who feel that there's nothing new to be gleaned by reopening this version for discussion. But with the evolution of tools like battle calculators and AAA, my experience has pushed me to feel differently. With that all out of the way, my first point in what I feel sets Classic apart from future versions in a good way is its simplicity. This edition has the fewest amount of unit types of any version in the canon, even 1941. Additionally, Classic has no units that take 2 hits. It has no unit-to-unit influences of almost any kind, really. And by that I mean there's no artillery to promote infantry, and there's no destroyers to influence the destroyer, submarine, aircraft love triangle in future versions. Strategic bombing is extraordinarily straightforward and simple. There are no national objectives. The rulebook has the fewest amount of pages compared to any other in the canon. I can go on, but I think you get it. And why I argue this is a strong point is that it makes this version in particular more accessible to a wider audience. In point of fact, this is exactly what Larry Harris had in mind during its development. He's said this in a few different interviews, but as you can see in this one here, he more or less states he wanted to make sure that this version wasn't overtaxing to the average board gamer and not restricted to the military simulation war gamers playing hex-based board games at the time. And I have a personal caveat I'll share here in regards to this. I can actually take a game of Classic on a family outing and get at least 2 or 3 members of my family to play it with me, and I can't say that about any other version. And believe me, I've tried. The best I could do was get through a half of a world turn of Anniversary before these same family members just threw in the towel, citing the complexity of the rules as the reason they were walking away. So that's my first and perhaps most humble point with regards to this game. The next point I want to highlight in what I feel sets Classic apart from future versions in a good way is the victory conditions of this game. So to fully understand the point I'm about to make, it's important to look at the most current and popular versions of Axis and Allies, including Spring 1942, Anniversary, and Global. All of these games are won and lost based off of control of a certain amount of victory cities. So once one side controls enough of these cities, they win. However, in my experience, and apparently in most of yours too, most games are not played until these cities are actually captured. Most games are played until someone concedes. And I feel like this usually occurs when someone's capital has fallen. So however significant this concept might sound, it's important to understand the rest of this argument. Because in contrast, the victory conditions in Classic are that either side must capture 2 capitals, or the Axis can win by having a combined IPC chart total of 84 at the end of any world turn. That's the end of America's turn. So this is interesting because it means if you study the map closely that in point of fact, no capital actually needs to be captured for there to be a victor in this game. And here's the crux of the point I'm making. The effect of that victory condition is to take the pressure off the Axis to take Moscow in half a dozen turns or so or lose the game. Instead, by warring for lower value IPC territories around the board, there can be game-winning battles in Africa, the Middle East, or even in Alaska or Panama, rather than the tired old story of having to take a capital or capturing victory cities. And here I'll insert a caveat from another personal example. In my most epic competitive game on AAA, playing Classic, the fights that decided the winner were for control of South Africa and Persia on America's final turn. So it's my strong opinion that this type of victory condition helps make for a game with a high replayability factor. Furthermore, I think it's a shame that victory cities became the go-to victory condition for most Axis and Allies games in the canon, and it's also a shame that some version of the economic victory didn't survive into any future version as well. And finally, the third aspect of Classic that I feel sets it apart from future versions in a positive way is of all things tech dice. Again, to comprehend the argument here, it's important to understand that the modern versions of Axis and Allies treat tech far differently than Classic does. In Global and Anniversary, tech is an optional rule, and in Spring of 1942, or the version Spring 1942, they took it out completely. Classic is one of only 2 versions in the canon where tech is actually not optional by out-of-box rules. Additionally, in Classic, there are no tech tokens for a failed attempt at a breakthrough. You either succeed at rolling a 6, or the money is completely lost. Finally, unlike modern versions, there is an overpowered technology in Classic that stands far above the other 5 in terms of lethality, and it's this one right here, tech number 6 at the bottom, the atomic bomb, also known as heavy bombers. So what this overpowered tech does is add 2 dice to your bombers. They now have the power to destroy 3 units in each round of combat if they're attacking, or they can inflict up to 18 IPCs worth of damage on an industrial bombing run. And so my argument here is that this version of Axis and Allies is the only one that got tech exactly right with this specific combination of factors. That is that tech's not an optional rule, there's no tech tokens, and that there's 1 overpowered tech out of 6. So in my experience, the most useful employment of this rule is as a legitimate Hail Mary at the end of a game of Classic that you're starting to lose. So let me describe to you what I mean. Let's assume a hypothetical situation in Classic. it's late in the game and you realize that the fortunes of war have shifted against you and that continuing to play out the game will just prolong the inevitable. So this is the point where a concession might be offered by the loser to the victor in a modern version of the game. But not so here. As soon as that feeling or realization hits you in Classic, rather than concede the game, you should roll for tech dice. Usually it's Japan for the Axis or the USA for the Allies, as they will usually have bombers already on the board at this point, but here's the punchline. Deciding to do this will involuntarily get everyone's heart racing. The adrenaline starts to flow freely, and if you're playing face-to-face, everyone at the table leans in to watch the dice roll. And if you're doing it right, there's usually 6 to 9 dice being thrown, so there's usually 1 or 2 breakthroughs. And then there's this insane release of elation or agony, depending on what side you're on versus what techs were actually acquired. And the game usually ends in this cataclysmic event or continues with everyone's blood pressure ratcheted up by an order of magnitude. And it's this potential for such a volatile and explosive ending that really sets Classic apart from the rest in the canon and makes for intensely memorable end of game situations in ways that Anniversary and Global just sort of struggle to rise to, in my opinion. That's not to say that these games aren't amazing in their own right. In fact, again, in many ways, these games are better than Classic. I'm just saying, and this will dovetail nicely into a good recap, these are the 3 distinguishing features that I feel set it apart from other versions in the canon in a positive way. Again, those were simplicity, the victory conditions with emphasis on the economic victory condition and how that influences the game, and third and finally, the end game use of technology. And I did my best to give supporting arguments for each on why I feel that way. So I'll close here. I hope this series of videos was at least interesting. I have other topics I might cover in the future, just not ones that I feel as strongly about right now. My next video will be part 1 of my 10-part strategy series on Axis and Allies Anniversary 1941. So hope to see you there. Thank you for watching this. All the best from the Good Captain, and bye-bye.